Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun today. For those of you who are watching, you see that my guest today says that she is a sass kicker. And I love that. And so please join me in welcoming Erin Hatzikostas, close, to the program today.
Thanks, Deb. Well, good.
You gotta love these names. People often mispronounce mine, and I'm like, yeah.
Well, quick story. My maiden name's Davis, and I often joke. I say, I met my husband, and if I could have found a man with a better last name, I would have, but I settled. So
right.
I can thank them for the Hatzikostas.
My maiden name was Gore, so it was a lot easier too. But yeah. So let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we will dive in. So Erin is a former corporate CEO turned professional pot stirrer. I love that. She is an internationally recognized leader on the impact of authenticity in the workplace. She is the CEO and founder of Be Authentic Inc. She's also a global keynote speaker, the author of 2 books, You Do You-ish, and the just released The 50% Rule, throwing out half the playbook to start competing in a league of your own. She is the co-host of the podcast Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck, and she is a coach-sultant. So again, join me in welcoming Erin to our program today. See, I'm not even going to try your last name.
That's okay. And I think you did the best You Do You-ish I've heard. So makes up for the name. It's all good. I love it.
You get that little pause in there, right?
I love the flair.
Ish. Ish. So, I always love finding out from my guests how it is that they got to where they are today. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, like most people, most of your listeners, a little bit of accident, a little bit of luck, a little bit of skill. But my journey really started in the healthcare world back in 1996. I was a sophomore in college, and I just dropped out of engineering. I hated it, but I also sucked at it. But I kept taking math classes, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And my roommate came home one day. She was a junior, so she was already in the business school. And she came in, I'll never forget it. And she sort of like flew in the door like Kramer on Seinfeld. She was like so excited. She's like, Erin, I found it. I found the career for you. And I was sort of like, okay, Amy, what is it? And she's like, no. It's high pay, low stress. And I was like, listening. And you just have to be good at math, and you're the only person I know who's good at math. It's called an actuary. So this is 1996, so I couldn't Google, how cool is the actuarial profession, of which I might have steered a different direction.
You would have steered clear.
I think
I'm married. I'm married to one of those. So,
I did what young impressionable people did in the 90s. I went to the library the next day and looked for all the books on actuaries, except for, as you might imagine, there were none.
Right.
Except for this beige, 4x6 pamphlet. And all it had in it was the names of companies, their addresses, and their phone numbers of companies that hired actuaries. So I got on the phone, made some phone calls, and eventually swindled Aetna, which is a big insurance company here in the United States, into hiring me. So I was in Michigan. I went out to Connecticut for the summer to do an internship, was hired back the next year. And I spent the next 3 years, not just working, but taking actuarial exams, as you know, Deb. I also spent the next 3 years failing actuarial exams. So
they're really, really hard. For people who don't know, they're very hard.
They're not just hard, Deb. Nobody told me they're graded on a curve.
Right.
So when you think you're good at math amongst normal people, you're not so good.
You're okay. Right. Yeah. But actuarial people, they're like true math nerds.
True math nerds that can sit in a room and study. So, but the good news is it brought me into Aetna, a great company, 50,000 people at the time. It's now owned by CVS Health. So, huge opportunities. And so I bopped around, took on different roles, and eventually joined a subsidiary company of theirs that they had acquired about 6 months earlier. A company that was called Payflex. It's since rebranded. And I just joined in an individual contributor role. I had been leading a large team. I actually decided to take, I think financially it wasn't really a step back, but there was a little bit of ego I had to set aside. My outlook got much smaller. I went from having all these people reporting to me to not, but I knew it was a growing industry. I knew that it was a good culture, and basically joined, but every time somebody would leave from this acquired company, they would sort of look around and be like, okay, well, maybe we should just give it to Erin, right? So I kept getting promoted, and until one day my boss was the COO, and I'll never forget it. It was a Friday, and he worked in a different office, and he texted me, "Can you talk?"
Oh, and you're like, uh-oh, it's Friday. Oh, no.
Friday. So he calls me up and he actually says, "Hey, this is a little heavy for a Friday, but I've decided to leave the company and I want to know if it's okay to recommend you as my successor." And Deb, I paused. I replied so quick. I was like, "No, thank you."
Yes. Thank you, but no, thank you.
No, thank you. And, what happened was, one, he was smart and we had a conversation. He said, think about it over the weekend. And so I did. And I asked a ton of people, their advice, et cetera. And that didn't help because everybody had a different opinion. And what finally hit me, which is important to this story and sort of my journey into this like obsession around authenticity and what I talk about, I basically realized that I had run this compromise calculation basically. And the compromise calculation is essentially what we do, which is we think there's a hard-coded anti-correlated line between sort of career growth and everything else in our lives.
Right.
So yes, I would have a bigger now executive position, but my family, my husband, my health, and maybe even who I
less time, all of that good stuff.
I'd have to compromise it. And then what hit me, and this is, I would say probably one of three most important things I'll probably say this whole hour. What hit me was I realized you shouldn't not do something because you hate the way it was done before. Instead, you can do it your own way.
Right.
And what I realized was that the reason I was running that compromise calculation is that I was just looking at the people ahead of me and, the heart attacks and the divorces and the constant plane trips and the stuffy corporate comms with their faces on it. And I didn't want to become any of that. And then it sort of hit me like, I don't have to do it that way. Right. So as the story goes, I took the CEO, I came back Monday, said yes. A year later, actually, my boss as a CEO was put into another role. I was tapped as interim CEO.
Ooh.
And they basically said, Steve is moving on. We're putting you into this role, but we're going to still go out there and look for if there's anybody better, which I'm sure they used other words.
Thanks.
I think they probably used other words, but that was the information.
Yeah.
But after I was pissed and got over that and had my exorcism, I sort of decided, well, if they're going to test the market, I'm going to test if I even want this. Right. And also I think, and this really gets to what we'll talk about, the 50% rule. I had this programming in me that is a big part of the second book, which is I hate to compete on the usual. I'd rather compete on the unusual, meaning I knew if this was a case of me going through a series of interviews and a resume that doesn't have any sort of CEO credentials on it, I would lose. But it hit me that while they were doing that, I get to compete on a different race. I get to compete by showing what I can do, right? Because I was interim and very quickly I, turned around some financial issues and some other things. And so eventually about 3 months later, they named me CEO. And so part of that story, sounds great, but the bad part of the story, the company was in the pooper. Like this company, 4 or 5 years straight of flat earnings, hadn't grown, which means you can't reinvest anything. People are frustrated. And so a lot of people were like, oh, wow, you're taking that job. Good luck.
Yeah. Yay. Mm-hmm.
Yay. What are you thinking? And in 3 years, though, without, having any CEO training, really not knowing what I was doing, we actually tripled earnings.
Wow.
We tripled earnings. Employee engagement went up 12 percentage points. And 3 years in, then I decided, I was really, really itching to do something totally new and fresh. And they were offering me other executive jobs. It was like when you go to the restaurant and you're like looking at the menu and you sort of try on the food in your head and you're like, crap, I don't want any, I don't want I don't want tacos. I don't want, fajitas, whatever. And that's kind of what it felt. So I decided to retire because I had enough years of service and I thought I was going to go out and run a smaller company. And here's what happened. We don't have enough time to slow down, whether you're in the corporate world, the entrepreneur world, and freaking see patterns. And so it was the first time I saw a pattern. Everybody kept saying, well, it's your authentic leadership. And that wasn't surprising, that word to be used on me, but it hadn't been used before. And what happened was I also had, towards the end of my tenure, thought, oh, this is great, but I feel like I'm kind of getting lucky with these results. Like I'm going to be found out at some point. My luck's going to run out.
Right. Little imposter syndrome type.
It was, I always say it's not quite, maybe it is imposter syndrome, but it was more about sacrifice. Like I could see everybody around me sacrificing more. And to me, that was, oh, to be an exec, you have to be on a plane. Those sacrifices, be on a plane every week, move your family, give up vacations, sweat it out. And I was working hard, but not as much as my peers. And so when I kept collecting that information, all of a sudden it hit me that I wasn't going to be found out. I was actually playing a different game than everybody else. And then after many months of writing and reflection and working on the TED Talk, right, on the creative process that really makes you slow down, the most important thing I figured out was that authenticity wasn't just for me. It wasn't a permission. It was actually a strategy. It was the thing that got me the best talent, that got me the trust from the executives, that got me through good negotiations. It actually fueled my success. And so when I had this epiphany that, wait a minute, corporate America and a lot of people in the workplace in general are so freaking miserable, and they think authenticity is a selfish gift to themselves.
Right.
When in fact, it is the thing that most can make them happier in what they do.
Right.
But also get results. I was like, oh crap, I have to go out and teach this. And that's sort of what started the journey. And then it goes from there.
I love it. And so many things to start discussing, the buzzword authenticity, that's what, one of the things that we hear, on social media. It's so important that you're authentic. And it is, when people know when we are faking it, right? And I think that's the thing, is so many times we think we have to fit into this box, whether that box is, I have to be the perfect, mother, I have to be the perfect employee, I have to be the perfect, CEO. And you mentioned it, there were all those traits. But I think authenticity has become one of those words that doesn't all, we're like, yeah, we're authentic. But I think the problem is we don't exactly know what it means. And so tell us what authenticity is to you and why it is so absolutely critical.
Yeah. I mean, so when you hear something that, authenticity, that most people think is just kind of be yourself.
Right. Be you-ish.
Well, that's why I say ish. That's why the ish. Most people think it's be yourself, bring your whole self to work, which is really freaking unactionable. And it's also really selfish. And so, the first place I start with people is that the Greek root word of authenticity is actually authentikos, and it means three things. It means to be genuine, but it also means to be original and authoritative. And when you think about people that are authentic, they are just, walking into work, for example, like they walk into their friend's, Christmas party.
Right. Here I am.
There is a je ne sais quoi, there is a juxtaposition, but most importantly, this is the secret sauce. They are not doing it for themselves. They are doing it for others. And so the definition that there's sort of two, but my main definition is that authenticity is about exposing who you are when people least expect it, in the service of others.
Say that again.
Authenticity is about exposing who you are when people least expect it, in the service of others. And so when you think about authenticity and sort of reverse engineer somebody that you're around that's authentic, they're doing it to create trust with you and connection and maybe even a little bit of intrigue, especially in the working world. The bar is so freaking low because everybody in a one-on-one situation, yes, there's a lot of authenticity, but as they face out in team meetings, in town halls, in corporate communications, there's so much whitewash BS.
Right. Where who is expected, who we need to be, all of those various things.
Yeah. And actually, and then the other thing to think about is I always say people that are authentic or authentic leaders focus not on what's normal, but what's unneeded. Right. So they're not just going through the motions. They're not like, oh, when I go to a board meeting, this is what they expect because this is how it's always done. They actually reverse engineer and say, what though, if I'm sitting on the other side of the table and our company's in this situation, what is actually needed? And so that's part of that. That's the part of the training wheels that gets you out of the wheels of the motion and helps you grab attention, helps you gain trust, helps people like you because it disarms them. And so, and then I teach sort of actions to start to train your habits in the other direction around this more tangible definition of authenticity.
Right. And it is hard because I think we have definitely kind of learned not to be authentic, to be more, this is what we need to do to get along, to get that, that promotion, all of those things. And, more importantly, I think sometimes we think, well, but being authentic is selfish. And it's the opposite of that, and because we all know when somebody is faking it, right? We're not going to go into it, but we're in the middle of a very contentious presidential election. Not sure there's any authenticity there. Let's just put it, right?
I think one side is actually using
a little bit more,
superpower.
But it's funny because when we see it, when we're not used to seeing it, we're like, whoa. Right. So, but, it is something. And of course we see, we see leaders like, Elon Musk. I have no idea what goes on in his brain.
He is the antichrist of authentic leadership.
Yeah.
I would not even put him in that bucket.
Yeah. He is, and he is definitely the I am in it for me. Right. I mean, and we say that, I mean, like when he took over X, I mean, first of all, I'm a branding person. You don't rename a company. That's just driven me nuts. But when he basically told people, you will sleep here on the floor. No, there are times where there are emergencies and all sorts of things. But I mean, it is all about him. And then when you look at somebody like, say, Richard Branson, who does put his employees first and all of those. Now, I only know anecdotal, but I think when we look at things like that, we think either I want to be like them, and hopefully nobody says I want to be like Elon, but I mean, there are people who are like, yeah, I want to be like him because look at how much money he has. You kind of sold your soul to the devil, but we get so caught up in the, that persona of what we think we have to be. And I think people are scared to show who they really are, because, oh my gosh, people might not like it. Right. And especially if, you're saying families come first. Well, your shareholders might not like that, or, all of those various things. So for those of us who are scared to be authentic, what do you tell them?
Yeah. So the first thing is why when we get into the working world, do we sort of get drawn in this sort of, I call it a river of inauthenticity that's just flowing so fast. I mean, I think not to get to, I think a big part of it is our schooling kind of teaches us that your success is driven by doing things right. The answer is C, the rubric is this. There's sort of prescribed, things that you're supposed to do.
You don't step outside that box.
Right. And so then when we enter sort of the workforce, we watch others and say, okay, our success is that we do it right, right? We get the answer is C, the rubric is this. This is how, the sort of corporate rubric, how you do things. What I tell people that are scared, it's really not about waking up the next day and being a different person. It's about little experiments. And watching and observing the little, the little collection points that come back. So I always say, why am I so confident in being authentic? It's not, it's not because I'm a different person than you. It's that I've been collecting data for a really long time. And I was lucky. My dad was showing me some of that data. I didn't know that for many, many years. And so I was watching, when I mean my data, I was watching him buck the norm, be more authentic, have success, right? And so, anytime you start to repattern something. And so then for myself, I was, it's not like when I took that COO position, if I had thought back and I had this epiphany, do it your own way. Well, the reality is what got me there was actually what was going to get me
right
in the future. It went against sort of the conventional thing, because the reason I've been successful before was that authenticity. So, I'd say experiment. When I work with clients, a lot of times I give them 3 potential experiments and then I have a framework too. But one, honestly, that everybody freaking loves, and it's so elementary, but is start with changing your out of office message. It is such a classic robotic, you're running down the inauthentic river like everybody else. And, and I woke up one day and I was like, who am I? Like, I will be on in the office. I will get back to you as soon as possible. Yes. If you have any questions, like, blah, blah, blah.
Here's who you talk to.
Yeah. And it's such a missed opportunity. And it's such an easy thing. You don't even have to be, so many people that do it, they're funny about it, whatever. But even if you just tell the truth, like, hey, I'm gone for 3 days at a softball tournament for my daughter. How many people are like, oh my gosh, my daughter played softball.
Oh my God, you have a real life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just opens up conversation. It's sort of, it sort of breaks the glass. And then, and I think for your group, talking about the 50% rule is probably more helpful. But in my first book, I have a framework called Humans. And it stands for humility, being unexpected, modeling, adapting, narrating, sparking. And the reason I bring this up is that framework, I would be a total hypocrite if I said I'm telling people how to be, authentic, because that's icky, right? And that's sort of counterintuitive, hypocritical even. But what I will tell you is that framework has been so helpful. I've been doing this for 5+ years now, to reprogram people and start to collect that data. So for example, humility. I teach people all the time that humility is a speed pass to connection and trust. And when you can use it strategically, whether that's in an interview, at the beginning of a business development meeting, when you're introducing yourself, even on a conference call, in an email, you immediately signal to people like, hey, I'm not going to BS you. Hey, I'm not hiding anything.
Right.
Hey, I'm just like you, Deb, imperfect, right? Like when we first, got on, had some challenges like, oh, awesome. Guess what? I'm imperfect too. We should meet, we get along. And so, but what's important about that is it's tangible and you have to work at it, because it's so much easier to walk into, a huge executive status meeting and do the same thing that's been going on for 3 years, but then bitch and moan like everybody else that it's a waste of time. And so you have to, it takes a little planning. It takes a little bit of, that's why I call it strategic authenticity. You have to think about, okay, what are some humility moments I should put in my pocket? What can I use those, and how do I practice it? So that's what I would say. Practice it, collect the data. And when I say the data, like it's things like, oh, that grumpy old CEO never smiled at me when I would do a sales meeting, and now he's all of a sudden smiling. Or this person always tuned out, was on their phone, and now they're paying attention. This person was like, look for those little indicators. You've disarmed somebody, that you've made a connection, that you've built trust. And then once you have that little data, then just, you're going to keep building upon it, and eventually you be using authenticity more and more in your everyday work.
Right. And like we've said, we, in many ways learn to not be authentic. So we're not going to go, okay, I am now authentic, because for one thing, we might not even know what that is, and what it is for us. But it's a big challenge. I think it's a really big challenge for women executives. We're seeing obviously far more, yay, not nearly enough. Yes. But I think the issue has been for so many years where a woman, even if it's a manager, let alone, C-level and things like that, we think we have to be like a man. Hello, how many years did we wear business suits?
Right.
And we only did it because men wore suits. And I mean, there was that whole fashion trend. It's kind of gone away, yay, where women even wore neckties. And they dressed exactly like a man. I don't have a suit anymore. I might even wear nice jeans and a jacket to a meeting. Now, obviously it depends on what it is, but yeah, we thought, and more importantly, we thought we had to be that masculine persona of hard, unforgiving, and all of those things that we think made somebody a good business person, when what might have got us there was the empathy, the caring, all of those things. And the important thing is, I think men are learning they can be those things too. They don't have to be the hard as nails boss that, is totally unbending. They can have empathy for their employees. They can show that they care about them. And I think it's, obviously made a big difference in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think, also it's such a missed opportunity. Even when you were saying, I might wear jeans and a jacket, well, in the right places, like I would even encourage, there's so many people listening that I know they're like, oh yeah, I'm authentic, like check. No, you're not everywhere.
Right.
Like I spoke to a group of CEOs and up in Canada a couple months ago. And the one guy was like, oh, well, yeah, isn't this a given? I'm authentic. And I'm like, no, you're not everywhere.
And
you're
it's kind of like when you
places.
say I'm an expert. Okay. When you have to self-proclaim it, there's kind
you're
of
not.
questionable. Right.
And the reason I feel confident sort of barraging him and your listeners is that I see it time and time again. There's always opportunities for more. So if you're, I know not a lot of your listeners are business owners, CEOs, running their own show. The opportunities go way beyond a one-on-one meeting, a dinner with a potential customer. They go into your website, they go into your RFP responses where you can start to use language, use the word poopy instead of bad,
right.
like just little things that disarm people, that make them sort of laugh, that are showing that you're human, putting it in your, videos, your mea culpas. So I think there's sort of a 101 and there's a 201. And I think a lot of people need help with the 101 because they've, whether it's women and executives and really have been deep programmed. But I would say even for your listeners who are like, oh no, I got that memo. I've bucked the norm. I've been myself. I really, really encourage you to think about it even more strategically. About where do you purposely look at how you're saying things, how you're presenting the board, how your materials are written, how your emails go out to your employees. Like there are millions of places that you're probably stumbling and have an opportunity to differentiate and stand out through authenticity.
Right. And it is a challenge. I think it's, something that is ongoing, but it is, think about it, how am I responding? All of the, like you were saying, and some of it is dress, right? When Ruth Bader Ginsburg started wearing, the lace collar, people were like, oh my God, and of course that was her, but she was making a statement. Hey, I am a woman. This is, and I think that's okay. Obviously it is okay. Because we do have to be ourselves. Now there are, people who the power suit, all of this, that's them. That's okay. But yeah, I was like, I
would say it's not even just about being yourself. We need to stand out. Like these are a bunch of entrepreneurs, people that are listening that are like, how do I grow my business? How do I beat my competition? How do I gain attention of my customers? And there's such an opportunity if you have a little bit of guts,
right?
Whether it's to wear the things, whether it's the lace things or the sneakers or the, hijab or
to dance when you shouldn't
when you
dance.
shouldn't dance. And that's a big part of about the next book. It's like, how do you at least do half normal and but half new so that you can stop competing with everybody else and really just compete in your own league.
Right. I interviewed Peter Shankman and several times and I listened to him and things on podcasts. And I remember one of the things he said was companies nowadays are perfectly happy to be average. And, if you're just a little above average, you're really going to stand out. But then if you are thinking, I need to be exceptional, whether it's your product, your service, how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, all of those things, people will flock to you. Now, not everybody's going to like that, right? That's okay. They weren't your people.
Yeah. 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 And then, so just to kind of keep my story going. So, okay, I've sort of figured out this authenticity thing. I've got something that, not got something here. Like I've got something that literally, Deb, was like a gremlin crawling out of me. This wasn't even what I planned to do, to be a speaker and a coach-sultant and an author. Right. So I'm doing that. I'm kicking butt. I'm doing the TED Talk. I'm doing the book, doing the keynotes. And meanwhile, I'm learning to become an entrepreneur, right? So I'm going on this other side journey, which is like, how do you build a speaking business? How do you write an email? How do you write? There's a million things you have to learn. And there's a million gurus. And I know you have this sort of in your, your podcast description, right? There's playbooks, there's masterminds, there's, coaches, et cetera. And so, while I'm on one side doing this, I'm learning. And I was at a 2-day intensive in Nashville. I was part of a group, like a mastermind group there. And it was like a 2-day deep dive. I think it was on building your speaking business. I can't quite remember, but I remember they had like a 87-page, PowerPoint playbook manual. It was beautiful.
Yes. It's going to guarantee that.
Yes. And I remember sitting there and I should have been thrilled. And I was actually paralyzed. And I remember thinking, because then, we go into the sucky songs, as I call them, in our head. And I'm like, oh my God, my time's run out. I've sprinted. I've had all this success. Now I'm lazy. I'm worn out. I'm never going to have the energy, right? Like all these things, like I've lost my gusto. I'm not as, and I'm sitting there. And then all of a sudden I remember thinking to myself, what if you 50% rule this?
Right.
Now, 50% rule was something I used to use in a different context. I used to always give career advice, like any job next job you take, you have to make sure it's 50% uncomfortable. And so I sort of I had been calling it sort of this 50% rule. I kind of had it in the attic and brought it down, dusted it off, but used it for another purpose. And what I meant to myself there was actually, what if you only take about half of what they're teaching you and you throw out the stuff that feels inauthentic, feels like it's old news, that feels too hard, you just don't want to do. And you bring in, though that leaves room, that means you half-ass it, that you actually bring in your own ideas. You look at the intent, say, what if I did this instead? And I remember immediately going from paralyzed to just like charged up, excited, like,
yeah, because, this was cool and that was cool. And that not so much.
Yeah. And so that was where the rule was born, but not at all enough to write a book about, right? So it was like this got me out of a hole. Like it was a self-help sort of tool. And so what happened is over the next year or so, I would use it for other things. It'd always take me forever to remember it. I'd get stuck in some corner for a month and then I'd be like, you dumbass, like 50% rule it. It became, faster and faster. And then what would happen is people would come to me with challenges, issues, whether it's clients of mine or others. And I just felt like 9 times out of 10, I was like, well, why don't you 50% rule it? And they're like, what's that? And so, and then I would watch them get unstuck. I'd watch them get excited. I watch them, sort of come up with new ideas. Still not enough to, write 280 pages about. Then what happened was crazy. So a couple of years of just like this great self-help tool, this motivator, this creativity, really an authenticity hack, right? Because it's sort of like, don't reinvent the wheel completely, but this half was like half safe, half new. And there was something really powerful about naming it. But then what happened was I started to see the rule sort of play out everywhere. So I was sitting in the theater watching Hamilton for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, Lin-Manuel Miranda, 50% ruled Broadway. And
Right.
he sort of took half normal and half new, but there's some lessons to what he did. I talk about in the book. I saw it with Weird Al Yankovic, who is a terrible singer, really, but a superstar. Why? Because he 50% ruled music. And I started to see it with John Madden and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and stuff Shopify had done. And I started to see sort of this rule play out, this half and half, and some unique mantras and lessons that came together that, that transformed this rule from this little self-help tool to actually this thing that helped people go from sort of, like I say, underdog to unmatched, like really quickly, without working harder, without just being the person that gutted it out the most. And that's why I'm so obsessed with it, because it has become this tool that not just makes me feel better, makes others feel better, but it's like a formula for leapfrogging the competition.
Right. Yeah. And there is, there's good stuff with anything somebody says, but it's never going to be 100%, because if it's 100%, you're probably not being authentic in following it. See, I'm going to loop us around, but you said, why reinvent the wheel? And I think that's where sometimes, especially entrepreneurs, get stuck is, oh my God, I have to totally start from scratch. No, maybe your idea is unique. Now, I'm going to challenge that. I'm not sure there's any unique ideas anymore, but there are so many things that we can learn from those who have gone through, and maybe that is your competitors. Maybe that's simple things like, okay, we learned that we need to build a team. We can't do it all. We have to delegate, all of those things. And so learn that and then say, okay, here's how I'm going to put my spin on it. And I love this concept because I think we all do it. We just don't realize it.
And we don't do it enough, right?
And when we don't, we're forcing it. It's like I always love the companies. Why do you do it that way? Well, that's because it's always been done this way. No, and now sometimes that still works. In many cases, that does still work. But why not go, what if we did it this way? And it might fail, right? I mean, oh, that's why, but we have to do it ourselves. And now I have to admit, I loved it when you talked about the Savannah Bananas. I follow them on social media. I live in Atlanta. I have told my husband, you need to get us tickets. I don't care what you do. You need to get us tickets. And they took baseball and they put their own thought process on
50% ruled baseball.
Yeah. Sure. And it's funny. I hadn't realized that they actually changed the rules. And
that's when they exploded. They were doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about that story is they had incredible incremental success for many, many years by being more creative with their showmanship and doing more unique things. It wasn't until they said, wait a minute, the game we're playing, though, is still leaving the stands empty after a couple of hours.
Yeah, because people went, okay, enough.
Long, it's boring. I've seen it. And it wasn't really until they had the guts to sort of, or the balls, I say in the
yeah, it is baseball.
To kind of go all in on their 50% ruling and change up some of the rules and create the banana ball and create a whole new league. And now it's not incremental success. They've had exponential.
Oh yeah. I mean, they were just in Yankee Stadium and sold out, right? And it's funny because your initial thought when you look at them is these guys are nuts. But when you really look at it, it's like, wow, these guys are crazy nuts. And I think that's excuse me, where we see that happen is when somebody really steps out and does something. Many cases we do think that is just absolutely crazy. And sometimes it doesn't work. But there are so many times when it does. I mean, how many of us, like I'm sitting here looking at my iPhone, right? Apple and Steve Jobs was so very different from the IBMs, all of those other things. But okay, the process is the same. I mean, you have this little thing that computes and spits out answers, but Apple took it in a totally different direction. Even with how they treated their employees. I was talking about this with another person the other day on this program. We were talking about the book. Now, this shows my age. When Guy Kawasaki wrote The Macintosh Way, right? They haven't even been called Macintosh for a long time. Right. But the employees, they had a juice bar, they had a piano with a live, because they treated their employees like they wanted to be treated. Right. And that was just so different. And of course, the thing was, then they were able to charge premium prices. They still charge premium prices because people go, oh yeah, that's great. And so I think, for anybody who's going, oh no, I must still go with the flow, think about those who don't and the success that they have.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you work, obviously you work with people about this, and it's really funny. I do have to admit, when I first, was glanced at this and thought the 50% rule, I thought, is that we do 50% of the work? No. In many cases, it's probably going to be more work.
Right. But you're going to have more fun doing it.
Right. Yeah. And you still have stuff that you're going to go, sure. I mean, that happens. Right. But it's what I love is that you really are saying, hey, we got to have fun doing this.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, and part of what was interesting when I wrote it was, some of the data in there, we've done primary research on authenticity and why it's so impactful, but also being able to show some of the studies and do some of the research. And one of the ones that I talk about that I think is so powerful is the self-determination theory. And that was, a theory that was developed by a couple psychologists back in the 70s who sort of challenged that the normal motivators of things like money or even like applause, encouragement weren't really what motivated people. And what their studies showed was essentially people are more motivated by autonomy. And so the 50% rule is not just important for you to motivate you too. It's also, I mean, there's a whole section on leadership and how to 50% rule. And I think one of the chapters is stop effing people up, right? Because and I was doing that, right? I was using the 50% rule. Meanwhile, people would ask for my advice and I would just tell it to them. And I never would say, oh, by the way, 50% rule, what I say.
Right.
By the way, listen. And so it's, it is about, I think the thing I'm most passionate about and I guess it's easier to say the thing I'm most against are things like productivity tools and grit and gutting it out and discipline. Like I write a lot about that. Like I am not a disciplined person, but I was a CEO of a company. Yeah, right. I had a lot of success. So how do you have success without discipline? And to me, the 50% rule is like the best way to do it. And the best way to also just have a nomenclature. I will tell you, even my team that supports my business now, we'll get on calls all the time and we'll be working through something and it's so easy. It's like, okay, we want to create a website. Okay, how do we want to do it? And I'm like, I don't know, 50% rule it. And then I'll see Rachel or Kate go, click.
Yeah.
So, I talk about in the book, look, I don't want you, there's a point where I, right before Savannah Bananas, where I'm like, look, I want to pretend that like, this is something that's totally new and never been found. Like that I found like the first tailbone of a dinosaur, but then you find out there's thousands of others. They're just called the coccyx bone. Right. But having a name, having a terminology is like a light switch, and a way to be able to communicate it with others around you that you lead, you work with, so that you get out of that stuckedness of robotically following, which is, not only miserable, but it's going to get you to sort of average results like you quoted before.
Right. I think COVID probably changed a lot of this, and because I always tell people, the micromanagers of the world, when their employees were no longer where they could reach out and touch them, I think their little heads just exploded, and they were the people who said, well, we're going to put programs on our employees' computers so that we can monitor their keystrokes. Yeah. And I know, it was like, I actually talked to people who said, yeah, I sat it down in front of my 3-year-old. And because I think that, they really did need to be 100% in control. And so many people discovered no, and I think this was maybe where so many figured out, okay, this 50% rule works. One of the rules is you work from 9 to 5.
Right.
Well, okay, I got 3 kids at home that I've got to be teaching during that time period, and I'm really more productive at 10 p.m.
Right.
Okay. So we're going to set a meeting that you need to attend. And so you have to be there, but then get the rest of the work done whenever you can get it done. And I think we discovered a lot of, there are still things that have to be done a certain way, depending on what industry you're in. There might be a lot of those things, or there might not be, but how you got them done, I think drastically changed. Because people did go, okay, I can work at midnight, I can work weekends, whatever it is. And the managers, the owners who figured out very quickly, as long as they're getting the work done, we don't care how it gets done.
Yeah.
Then I think those are the companies where the statistics said productivity really soared.
Right.
Is there something to be said for being in an office and all of those things? Yeah, I think there is definitely that. Because part of that is the, hey, Erin, you're standing by the coffee machine, used to be the water cooler. How are your kids doing in soccer? All of those things definitely help with that. But yeah, when people figured out, as long as the work is getting done, so that's kind of that 50%, we're going to let them do it the way that works best for them. So that's their 50%.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh. So, now that a lot of companies, especially, I think probably the majority have now reversed the whole work from home thing, at least to a large degree. Maybe it's work from the hybrid type of situation. Do you see people falling back into their old habits, or did they really learn, hey, this is the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the virtual environment is harder for that authenticity, because you're not, you have less of those moments where you're in the, you're in the conference room early or at the water cooler. And so creating those connections. So I would also say that's why it takes more work. It takes study. It's a habit that you have to actually cultivate. Even more. I think it's definitely the case in the virtual world.
Right. I was talking to some, a business owner who said he has, their weekly meetings, whatever, Monday morning, however they do them. And he said it is required that you were there for the first 10 minutes, so no coming in late. And the first 10 minutes are totally personal. What'd you do over the weekend? What are you reading? All of those things, to try and keep that kind of water cooler type of feeling going. But he had to require it because there were so many people who went, that's not important.
Right.
But of course it was important. It's just as important as walking into somebody's office and seeing the picture of their kids, or as you said, the out of office message, doing this weekend, I've gone fishing, whatever it is. It's those little things. And our clients like learning that too. Our customers, the whatever the heck we're going to call them, because it puts us all maybe on the same level.
Yeah.
I think we got so caught up for so long, and maybe, I am the baby boomer generation, but I think we did get so caught up in, and we talked about it at the start, this is how things have to be. And so we always think, we have to always be professional. We can't, for our clients, our employees, all of those things. No, it's that fun extra stuff that obviously makes us more authentic. Now, you might not be comfortable sharing, and yes, there are certainly those who overshare. But it's that combination of, give a little bit about you that really helps people build those relationships.
Yep.
And I've talked a lot with folks about the fact that it is about the relationships. People don't buy based, depending on what it is. It's not always cost. It's all, not always the thing. It's the relationships. If I walk into a business and I'm not, and I'm talking, in most cases, like retail, if somebody doesn't greet me, even if it's welcome to Moe's, that drives me nuts. I don't know if you have Moe's up where you are, but it's that welcome to Moe's. It startles you half to death. But I like that. I like somebody saying, hey, we're glad you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it authentic that they're saying welcome to most? No, because they all have to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the other ones that is more, I'm in Atlanta, the land of Chick-fil-A, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they are trained that they are to say, it's been my pleasure to serve you, or something along those lines.
Mm.
But when it's, I have been told I have to say this every single time, or it really has been my pleasure to serve you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It has to be true. And yeah, you can't fake it.
Right. And it's not, speaking of faking it, it's not fake it till you make it.
Mm. Correct.
So for those who are struggling, how do you tell them, okay, it's worth it?
Well, I mean, one, I share my story. Two, share the data. I mean, that's why we did the research that we did 3 years ago, the impact of authenticity in the workplace. And we not only showed that things like people followed authentic leaders out the door 600% more than non-authentic leaders, or followed them anywhere, but putting out the door. Trust went up for 400%. We also had unique results. Like, I would ask you, which generation do you think wants authenticity the most? Would you say, Deb?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I would say baby boomers, but it's not. But I say that because it's what we don't get. And so I think we crave it.
You're right. It's actually, most people think, oh, the young generation.
Right. Oh, those darn millennials.
Yeah. Or Gen Z or I've got a Gen Alpha in my house, right? But we've found data that actually was the total opposite direction, that those executives, not that they're all boomers are all executives, but it's really the older generation that craves it, but they've been, you said it exactly right. We've been sort of suppressed for so long that we've waved the white flag. But we also showed results that people got promotions and pay increases because of their authenticity, that people attributed job security to their authenticity, results to their authenticity. So, I think, and then the last thing I would say is, one of the best things is to reflect on what you like. What do you love?
Right.
What is a company, a conversation, a salesperson, a CEO, a boss, that what do you crave? And then stop thinking that you're, I always say hashtag you're not special. You're not the only one that wants that, right? Everybody else wants that. And so if you can reverse engineer that and then just take those baby steps and collect the data like we talked about before.
And I like knowing that people are human. Years ago, I worked for ING, right? Big financial company. And one of my jobs was to do the annual report. And so we did a lot of philanthropic work in the community. I mean, like, my budget way back then was almost $1 million. And so a lot of our things revolved around kids, because that was very important to our employees and things. And so I remember we did a photo shoot, and I took our CEO to do this photo shoot at the Children's Hospital. And he was supposed to hold this small child now we're at Children's Hospital. So kid had IVs, all these things. God bless him. He was terrified. And he'd never had kids. He just thought, I'm going to kill this kid. I'm really going to kill this kid. And we took one look at the initial pictures and went, we can't use those, because you could see that was just not what he wanted to do. So we rethought it. And actually, oh my gosh, we asked him, what do you even want to do this? Because, we could do something else. And if you want to do it, what would you be comfortable doing? And he said, I don't want to touch him, because he really did think, I'm going to knock a tube loose and I'm going to kill this poor child. But, he said, can we play games? Can we do things like, and then you could just see in his face how much more comfortable he was doing that. And I think that's one of the things that we forget that we need to communicate with people.
Right.
What are you comfortable doing? What are you uncomfortable doing? And all of those various things. But we have to give them the freedom to be able to tell us the truth. And that, I think, is one of the challenges. Comes back to authenticity, right? Well, I'm not going to tell somebody, I don't want to stand up in front of people and give presentations. because that might be part of my job. Well, no. Okay. Maybe I'll tell them that and they'll say, can we send you to Toastmasters? What can we do to make you more comfortable? And having all of that all around authenticity is going to work. And back to the 50% rule. Okay. Well, you're maybe not comfortable giving a presentation in front of 100 people. What about 10? And okay, I can do 10, but yeah, maybe I'll work up to doing 100, but it's how can we help people? And you really talk about that in the book. How can we help our employees, our clients, or whoever they are? How can we help them through all of this process?
Yep. That's right.
Well, oh my gosh, Erin, we've only got a couple minutes left. This has been such a great discussion. And I love the fact that your book just came out like 2 days, before we are doing this program. So, I encourage people to do that, but tell us a little bit more about, I have to look it back up here real quick. Be Authentic Inc. Yeah. What are the services that you provide and how do people connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. So Be Authentic Inc. We, essentially are all about rewriting the BS in the working world. And we do it through a number of ways. One, I do a lot of keynote talks across both entrepreneurs and the corporate world. I call it coach-sulting. It's sort of a business coaching, primarily focused on CEOs, presidents of small to mid-sized companies that really have the ability to make an impact and don't necessarily have or want an executive coach, but also don't want a business coach. I'm sort of both of those. I'm 50-50 rolled into one. And I love working, especially in the insurance, the B2B sort of world, because I understand that world so well. And then we have the podcast. And I also do a lot of corporate programs, where I expand my authenticity training. We work through my humans. I also do something called win rooms to help them apply sort of more authentic ways to sell and have success, with their organizations as well.
I love it. And the website is just B, not BE, beauthenticinc.com.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. And so you can go there and check things out. And then if you want a real human, and the place I interact the most on social media is LinkedIn. I'm a listener.
And you are the only ones.
I am the only Erin Hatzikostas, at least on the internet. So if you can spell it, you can find me.
I love it. So cool. So cool. And like I said, this has been a great discussion. I think it's something that we need to talk more about, because we're scared to. Right. And so I love that you're helping people by bringing this up and saying it's okay. It really is okay. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I think I would just leave with a very succinct, stop trying to outwork everyone and start trying to out-unique them.
I love it. So cool. So cool. Well, I am Deb Creer. I've been having a fascinating discussion with Erin Hatzikostas. I came close.
Yeah, you nailed it. Pretty darn close.
And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.